Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're cutting through the noise to explore a really urgent topic, the threat to the American dream.
Right.
Our mission here is to dissect a compelling argument from a unique perspective that the biggest security threat we face isn't external but internal, specifically the shrinking middle class.
Exactly.
We're diving into material that proposes something called an economic war plan to revive that dream. The author, Mike Hayes, he even brings up George Washington's farewell warning.
About political parties, yeah. What warms you can also consume you.
That's the one. And this deep dive looks at how things like AI, aren't just seen as a threat, but maybe a tool to help people think bigger and grow richer, pulling on ideas from classics like Think and Grow Rich.
And what's really compelling, I think, is how the source frames this. It's not just another policy debate. It's positioned as an existential crisis that demands a radical shift.
We're talking about a view from a former CIA officer, a Pentagon official, now a senator, who basically says if we lose the middle class, we risk losing our democracy, our country even.
It is a stark framing, almost unpolitical for such a political issue.
Yeah.
So what does this mean for you, our listener, someone who likely follows these debates? It's about unpacking why so many feel the system is, rigged.
Why it feels harder to provide for your family.
Exactly, and what specific actionable plans are actually being proposed to get government back to sort of its foundational purpose. Let's really get into it.
Okay.
So for anyone tracking the economy, this decline of the middle class, it's not exactly news, but the source uses a really stark measure.
It does.
In the last 50 years, the share of Americans in the middle class dropped nearly 20%, and their total wealth, their power, basically cut in half. The argument is that money and opportunity are just increasingly skewed towards those who already have it, and that's causing, widespread frustration.
And this isn't just presented as a statistic, right? The source analyzes it as a fundamental break, the breaking of the Great American Deal.
That old idea where government sets the stage.
Right. Sets conditions for success, and people work hard to achieve it. That deal, the source says, is failing.
And why?
Well, the analysis points to politicians, frankly on both sides, getting distracted, losing focus on relentlessly expanding that middle class.
Lured by.
Special interests, re-election cycles, focusing on maybe more niche issues instead of that core mandate.
And you see this playing out on the ground. Think about Michigan, a state that, it practically invented the modern middle class.
Dollar plans,
You could work there, afford the car you were building.
Yeah.
Now you look at communities like Hawley, Flint. People are struggling just to get in, let alone stay in the middle class.
Often doing worse than their parents or grandparents.
Yeah.
And that brings us to a really critical point the source makes. When people can't provide for their kids, when that promise of moving up seems broken, it breeds anger, shame even, a loss of dignity.
And in a democracy like ours, multiracial, multi-ethnic,
That feeling creates fertile ground for suspicion, for division.
That's the existential threat part.
Exactly. That internal breakdown. The potential to tear ourselves apart from the inside. That's how the source frames it.
So the proposed solution then is about getting government back to basics.
Fundamentally, recenter it on those core principles.
Like jobs that pay enough so you can actually save something.
Schools that genuinely prepare kids for those jobs. Not yesterday's jobs, but tomorrow's.
A home you can actually call your own.
Safety. Security in your community.
Reliable, affordable energy.
A healthy environment to pass on. And, of course, healthcare you can access and afford.
Right. So the economic war plan is basically designed to rebuild all of those fundamental systems.
That's the idea presented.
Okay, so with that threat diagnosed, the source pivots from just identifying the problem to outlining this comprehensive cure, the economic war plan.
And it starts with jobs. Makes sense.
Yeah, foundationally. This source uses this analogy. The middle class is like a ship that's been taking on water for 30 years.
Okay.
And now it's about to hit a Category 5 hurricane. That hurricane. Artificial intelligence.
Right. AI isn't some far-off thing in this view. It's an immediate disruptor.
It's going to radically change the economy. Job gains, sure, but also job losses. Especially, it seems, in those entry-level white-collar roles. Paralegals, maybe accountants.
But the source also suggests skilled trades, plumbers, electricians might be more resilient, and people-centric jobs like nursing, teaching.
Interesting distinction.
But what's crucial here, I think, is the emphasis on proactive preparation. We can't just react.
So what does that look like?
It starts with radically realigning policy to actually support small businesses. They employ nearly half of America's private workforce, right?
Huge number.
So the actionable steps are about genuinely simplifying things. Taxes, licensing, patents, regulations, all that stuff that burdens them now.
Not just talk, but actual simplification. Like maybe a single portal for registration instead of jumping through 50 hoops.
Something like that. Consolidating permits, making it clearer. That's the kind of detail implied.
Which leads us to the first sacred cow the source wants to challenge. This was provocative.
Okay.
The argument is that Democrats often lump small local businesses in with giant multinational corporations.
Ah, yeah.
And the result is policies that can hurt the little guy.
Yeah.
And it fosters this perception, maybe unfairly, of being anti-business.
So the source is drawing a sharp line there.
Yeah. It emphasizes this core idea. If you play by the rules, doesn't matter your background, you should have a shot at being wildly successful.
And that point then connects logically to bringing critical supply chains back home, reshoring.
Yes. The source advocates for a pretty aggressive 10-year industrial policy.
And this isn't just like old school protectionism. It's framed as targeted strategic investment.
Right, to prevent other countries from having veto power over international security.
So we're talking essentials. Military hardware, food supplies, pharmaceuticals, definitely microchips.
Yeah, it's not about making, Rubik's Cubes here.
Right.
But we can't be dependent on, say, China for rare earth minerals or India for critical cancer drugs.
It implies a need for things like public-private partnerships, strategic government investment beyond just tariffs.
Though the source does say tools like targeted tariffs, working with allies, incentives. They're necessary. But it warns against, what was the phrase?
Sloppy and chaotic tariffs.
That's it. Saying they're no substitute for a real long-term strategy.
The plan also zooms in on the immigration system, calls it broken.
For everyone involved, it seems.
Yeah. Not working for employers needing labor, not for border officials, not for the immigrants themselves.
And it highlights the economic contribution, right? Immigrants filling critical labor gaps.
And driving small business growth.
Yeah.
1 in 4 small businesses in Michigan, the source notes, owned by immigrants. So the proposal is for a new system, something dynamic that automatically adjusts visa caps based on real-time workforce needs.
Instead of just political fights every year.
Right. Paired with, importantly, a robust and clear plan for border security. This automatic system would use labor market data, ideally taking some of the politics out of the numbers.
Okay, that leads to the second sacred cow.
Which is?
The whole political phrase, comprehensive immigration reform.
Yeah, the all-or-nothing approach.
Yeah, the source basically calls out both parties for walking away from deals in the past for political reasons.
Yeah.
Short-term gain over long-term solutions.
So the call is for?
Big, bold change, whether that's one massive bill or 5 smaller ones. Just work with anyone who's genuinely serious about making progress.
And underlying all this job talk is a fundamental assertion.
The jobs need to pay enough.
Enough for a stable life from one full-time job. Enough to actually save.
And companies.
They should share the wealth when productivity goes up. The source argues there should be real consequences if they don't. Specifically, no tax incentives for big global companies if their workers still need federal help like Medicaid or food stamps.
The double dipping point.
Exactly. Taxpayers shouldn't subsidize corporate profits by covering their employees' basic needs. That's the argument.
And what about unions? Always a hot topic.
The source is pretty unequivocal here. Unions are not the problem.
Okay.
They were created historically because of corporate exploitation. That's the perspective. Now, do unions need to be nimble, adapt? Sure.
That the onus is on
Corporations. If they're worried about unionization, the source says focus on providing good wages and benefits in the first place.
Okay, so jobs are the foundation. But people need to be ready for those jobs, especially with AI changing things. That brings us to schools.
Yes, the next pillar. Preparing kids for this future economy.
And here we hit the third sacred cow.
Let me guess. College.
Bingo. The idea that you must go to college, get a 4-year degree to be successful.
The source challenges that directly.
Yeah, it points out that in places like Michigan, skilled trades operating engineers, pipe fitters, they often earn more than recent college grads.
Right. Validating making a living with your hands is a worthy and financially smart path.
So what does that mean policy-wise? Big investment in
certification programs, community colleges, trade schools, apprenticeships, all those pathways.
And it also means taking, I like this phrase, a stick of dynamite to federal workforce training programs.
Yeah. Because they're a mess, apparently.
Scattered across 40 different programs, 14 agencies. The goal is to consolidate, align them all towards actual training and retraining for the future economy with measurable results.
Now, four-year colleges still have a role, obviously.
Research and development, definitely. Inventing the next GPS, finding cures for diseases.
Strategic investment is needed there, but the source insists universities have to be held accountable.
For what?
Accessibility, affordability. We need guardrails on runaway costs and the student loan crisis.
And all of this rests on K-12 education being solid.
Absolutely foundational. Recruit and pay teachers better. Smaller class sizes.
Updating curriculum seems key, especially science and math.
And introducing AI concepts factually. Preparing kids, but also teaching them to think critically about it.
But the source also flags a downside to tech.
It does. It points fingers at social media and constant cell phone use. Says it's causing students to lag in crucial skills.
People skills, problem solving.
Exactly. So the proposal is pretty direct. Ban cell phones in K-12 classrooms.
Wow, okay.
And hold social media companies accountable for designing addictive algorithms. The source is adamant. We need rules of the road for AI because the tech industry will not police itself.
Makes sense. Okay, moving from schools to shelter.
Housing.
The dream of home ownership. Foundational to the American idea for so many. But today, less affordable than maybe ever.
The numbers are stark. 2005, average new home, maybe $140,000.
Today, over $500,000, $500,000 plus.
It's staggering, and it explains why the average American isn't buying their first home till they're 40 years old.
So what caused this? The source points to.
Builders basically stopped building after the 2008 crash. That created a huge supply gap over a decade. Plus, regulatory hurdles increased.
And then COVID hit.
Right. Sparked demand, inflation kicked in, perfect storm, scarcity, unaffordability. It wasn't just market forces. The source argues it was policy choices leaving us unprepared.
So the proposed fix is pretty dramatic. Declare a housing emergency.
And spur the building of about 4 million homes just to catch up with the need.
But the source notes this massive issue.
Yeah.
It barely gets discussed seriously in politics.
Yeah, surprisingly little focus. No significant proposals in major bills currently. It's a disconnect.
So what's the single biggest thing holding back building, according to this?
A maze of overlapping and outdated housing regulations.
Individual rules might have made sense at some point.
But piled up together, they make it incredibly hard, sometimes impossible to build. Especially affordable single-family homes or even denser middle-class housing.
Things like old zoning laws.
Exactly. Laws designed for a different era that now effectively ban affordable multifamily units in many places, driving up land costs and forcing sprawl.
Which brings us neatly to the fourth sacred cow.
Which is
taking responsibility for how overregulation, even if well-intentioned, can just stop important work cold.
So the plan isn't just deregulation, but smart streamlining.
Yeah. Streamline the rules, offer big incentives for communities to change zoning laws that block construction.
And measure success differently.
Right. Not by how complicated the approval process is, but by the actual number of homes getting built, tangible results.
Okay, homes need power. Let's talk energy.
The source calls for a true all-of-the-above energy plan. No picking favorites based on politics.
Because prices are climbing.
Up 13% in the last 3 years alone, faster than inflation, and AI. That's going to spike demand even more.
Huge power needs for data centers.
Without a plan, the source warns we risk rolling brownouts, blackouts, real consequences.
So all of the above means everything.
Basically. Natural gas, nuclear, batteries, renewables, wind, solar, hydro, plus looking at new stuff, fusion, biofuels, whatever works and is reliable. It's about practical energy security.
Which leads right into the fifth sacred cow.
This one's about climate change approach.
How so?
The source suggests some actors approach it almost like an elitist purity test.
Using it to score points rather than solve problems.
That's the critique. It argues that anyone telling you to scrap certain reliable energy types just because it's woke
cares more about politics than your power bill.
Precisely. Climate change is happening. The source acknowledges that. Extreme weather hits middle-class wallets hardest.
So the strategy should be different.
Expand the coalition. Meet people where they are. Start by framing climate action explicitly as a pocketbook issue.
Economic security, cost savings for families. Makes pragmatic sense.
Okay, final major area. Healthcare.
Which the source describes as fundamentally broken.
Yeah, for everyone. Doctors, nurses, admin, patients. Nobody's happy.
And there's a personal story shared.
A powerful one. The speaker's mother, diagnosed with ovarian cancer, no insurance. They had to fight the insurance companies tooth and nail while she was fighting for her life.
That really brings home the human cost of the system's failures.
It does. And the source issues a warning that some political factions want to finish the job of cutting healthcare further.
Which is framed as a direct risk to everyone's insurance and costs, an economic security threat.
So the proposed solution here is a true public option.
Meaning?
Allowing any American to buy into a nationwide public insurance plan, a government-run option.
So not replacing private insurance, but competing with it.
Exactly. Offering a stable, reasonable choice if you leave a job, move, start a business, retire early, while keeping private plans available.
Seems incremental, but the source argues it would change the face of healthcare in America.
By introducing real competition and choice.
The plan also targets prescription drug prices, calls for a literal battle axe.
Yeah, Points out that Americans invent these miracle drugs.
And then pay way more for them than anyone else in the world. Companies jack up the prices.
So the fix is negotiation.
Empowering Medicare and this new public plan to negotiate prices, like bulk buying, the Costco model, the source calls it.
Makes sense. Leverage buying power for lower unit costs like other countries do.
And transparency. It calls it crazy that you often don't know the real price until you're literally at the pharmacy checkout.
So true. Now, why haven't things like this happened? The source points directly at
special interests, lobbyists, political donations.
Yep. Calls it the ugly reality that members of Congress protect industries that give them money.
With real-world consequences for middle-class families paying those high prices.
Which leads to what this source considers the ultimate sacred cow, the biggest hurdle.
And the overarching goal.
Regaining the trust of the American people. And that requires deep political reform.
Like what specifically?
A full ban on corporate pitching money. Those direct contributions from corporations to politicians.
Which can create conflicts of interest, or at least the appearance of them. The speaker notes they're one of only 6 senators who's never taken it.
Right. And also banning members of Congress from trading individual stocks and cryptocurrencies.
To ensure they aren't personally profiting from insider knowledge or policies they influence.
The core argument is the middle class doesn't have legions of lobbyists or super PACs fighting for them.
So the source contends the Democratic Party should be their voice, unequivocally.
And gutting the influence of big money in politics? The source says that's not radical.
It's just getting back to basics.
So this deep dive has really laid out a comprehensive vision, an economic war plan, tackling what the source sees as an existential threat, the shrinking middle class.
Yeah, from jobs and schools to housing, energy, healthcare. The underlying message is a call for government to step up, to uphold its end of that great American deal.
Right. And connecting it all, the argument isn't just about playing defense anymore.
No, the source urges going on offense. An affirmative, positive, bold plan for the country. Getting back to those first principles. Being relentless, really, in protecting the nation.
So we've explored this idea of slaughtering sacred cows to tackle these really deep, entrenched problems. It makes you think. Reflecting on all this, what systems or assumptions maybe in your own life, your work, your community, what do you see as sacred cows? Things we just accept that might actually need challenging or even discarding if we want to make real progress.
What would that really take?
Something to ponder.
Definitely. Consider that as you keep navigating this complex world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.